The Western provinces just dropped a bombshell on Canada. And make no mistake, this is not some empty political stunt. This is a declaration that the West is finished being Ottawa's doormat, finished being treated like second-class citizens while their money and resources are sucked eastward and wasted. Wexit has been mocked for years, brushed off as fringe anger, but now it has teeth. This is rebellion turned real. Ottawa is facing something it has never truly taken seriously, and it might already be too late for them to stop it. Let's start with Alberta, because if Confederation has had a workhorse, it is Alberta. This province has carried the nation for decades, pulling the cart while others either sit in it or whip it from behind. Billions upon billions flow out of Alberta every year, straight into Ottawa's hands. What do Albertans get in return? Do they get gratitude? Respect? Even basic fairness? No. They get insults. They get their industries smeared as dirty, their workers ridiculed as backwards, their very way of life demonized. Imagine being told to carry the weight of a country and then being spat on by the very people you are keeping afloat. That is Alberta's story. Is it any wonder then that Albertans are saying enough is enough? Ottawa's arrogance and hostility have pushed them to the breaking point. Separation isn't some bluff on the table anymore. It's survival. It's the only way forward for a province that has been robbed, sabotaged, and disrespected year after year. And let's be clear, Ottawa has done this deliberately. Just look at Alberta's energy sector. This is an industry that could have made Canada a global energy superpower. But instead, Ottawa turned it into their favorite punching bag. Think about it. Keystone XL, dead. Energy East, cancelled before it even started. Northern Gateway, vetoed like Alberta's future, was nothing more than a nuisance to be brushed aside. Each one of these projects could have transformed communities, created jobs, generated billions in revenue. Each one could have solidified Canada as a powerhouse. And what did Ottawa do? Smiled smugly while they pulled the plug. The Keystone XL cancellation alone cost Alberta $3 billion directly, and when you tally up the shelved projects, you're staring at nearly $500 billion in lost opportunities. $500 billion. That is not misfortune. That is sabotage disguised as policy. And then comes equalization. The dreaded word in Alberta households. Over the past decade, Ottawa siphoned $250 billion from Alberta. $250 billion stolen and sent eastward to bankroll provinces that sneer at the very industries keeping this country alive. Families, workers, small businesses, people who poured their lives into building Alberta's economy have watched their hard-earned money vanish to fund those who lecture them about transitioning to some fantasy green utopia. Hospitals, schools, infrastructure. Don't Alberta could have been building world-class services at home with that money. Instead, Ottawa decided to strip Alberta bare. And in return, Albertans get scolded and told to shut up. How long do they think people will tolerate this abuse? Here's the truth. Alberta has already crossed the line. The mood is no longer frustration. It is determination. Polls show a plurality of Albertans leaning toward independence. This isn't fringe. This is mainstream. Ottawa can no longer dismiss this as a small group of angry ranchers. It is a movement, and it has the receipts. The Alberta Prosperity Project has already done what Ottawa has feared most. They've pushed forward the referendum question. Danielle Smith lowered the threshold to 147. So zero signatures to trigger it, and organizers claim they already have over 240 signatures ready. That's not theory. That's action. That's a ballot question practically guaranteed. And once it hits the ballot, everything changes forever. This is why Ottawa is panicking. You can see it in the way the federal government mocks, downplays, and tries to silence any discussion of independence. But every attempt to crush the conversation only fuels it more. You cannot extinguish a movement born from decades of betrayal. You cannot erase the anger of families who know they have been robbed. Carney and his liberal buddies can toss scraps to Alberta, maybe offer Churchill or some token resource project, just enough to keep the so-called redneck hicks quiet. But that game is over. Alberta has woken up, and they are not alone. Because right next door, Saskatchewan is already lacing up its boots. Ottawa may think Alberta is isolated, but Saskatchewan is not about to be left holding the bag. This province produces 460 barrels of oil every day. It has potash, uranium, wheat, industries tied far more to US buyers than to Ottawa. They know exactly who keeps strangling them with rules, taxes, and red tape, and their premier, Scott Moe, has already said he won't block a referendum. That is as close to a green light as you get in politics. And in Saskatchewan, the threshold is only 125 signatures. For a province this fed up, that's child's play. Grassroots campaigns are already mobilizing, and the mood is crystal clear. They refuse to be Ottawa's next piggy bank once Alberta walks. Because let's face it, if Alberta leaves, Ottawa is going to try to dump the financial burden onto Saskatchewan, and Saskatchewan knows it. Why would they stay shackled to a sinking ship while their neighbor next door has broken free? They won't. They will follow Alberta. Not because they want to burn the flag, but because they refuse to be strangled alone. Ottawa's equalization guillotine would cut Saskatchewan's throat if they stay behind. Leaving is the only way to survive. And then there's Manitoba, the quiet middle child of Confederation. People don't always pay attention to Manitoba, but they should, because Manitoba is the logistical backbone of the prairies. Rail lines, ports, and access to the US all cut through it. If Alberta and Saskatchewan are the fuel, Manitoba is the pipeline. Without Manitoba, no Western corridor works, and patience in Manitoba is wearing thin. Local leaders and Indigenous voices are starting to call out Ottawa's failures openly. That is a crack in the silence. And once Manitoba leans west, the entire balance of power shifts. Ottawa cannot stop that. They can scream, threaten, but the math will not change. A Western bloc anchored by Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba is unstoppable. This is the reality staring Ottawa in the face. They are running out of excuses, running out of tricks, running out of time. Confederation is cracking right before our eyes. And it all begins with Alberta saying they will no longer play the role of Ottawa's piggy bank. Once the dominoes fall, you cannot glue them back together. Now let's move further west into British Columbia, specifically the interior, because that is where Ottawa's destruction has hit just as hard as in Alberta and Saskatchewan. When people think of BC, they picture Vancouver's latte sipping urban bubble. But outside of that bubble, the interior towns live and die by forestry, mining, oil, and natural resources. These are not abstract industries on a spreadsheet. They are lifelines for entire communities. And what has Ottawa done to them? The same thing they did to Alberta. They strangled them. Layers of red tape, endless vetoes, environmental rulings that look less like protection and more like execution. Ottawa pats itself on the back for saving the environment while whole communities are gutted. Mills are closed. Projects are mothballed. Jobs vanish. Families watch their towns hollow out. And Ottawa shrugs. This isn't just about lost paychecks. It is about survival. It is about watching your community die, while politicians in Ottawa congratulate themselves on another so-called green victory. That's why separation talk is no longer confined to Alberta. It is spilling into BC's interior. Town halls are filling with separation meetings. People who never cared about politics are suddenly asking, why should we stay in a system that is choking us? That is not fringe anymore. That is mainstream anger turning into action. The frustration is thick. And once ordinary people who used to stay quiet start talking about leaving Canada, the dam is cracked. So what happens next? The grassroots in Alberta and beyond cannot wait for Ottawa to suddenly grow a conscience. That will never happen. They need to act. That means peaceful protest. That means organizing on the steps of the Alberta legislature. That means raising funds now to flood Edmonton with thousands of Albertans demanding a referendum. Not next decade. Next year. The question must go on the ballot. Because once it does, there is no turning back. And let's be honest. When Alberta leaves, everyone else will be forced to choose. This is not just any province. Alberta is the engine. Its GDP sits at $340 billion, making up 14% of the Canadian economy with only 11% of the population. You pull that out, and the entire country's financial balance collapses. Ottawa will scramble to dump that burden onto Saskatchewan and Manitoba. But as we've said, they are not volunteering for that suicide mission. This is why equalization becomes the guillotine for Saskatchewan and Manitoba. Staying behind means bankruptcy. Leaving means survival. It's not even really a choice. And once interior BC adds its weight, you have a Western bloc that Ottawa cannot defeat. People forget that separation isn't about burning a flag out of spite. It is about breathing again after being strangled for too long. It is about saying no to policies that destroy your livelihood and your community. For the prairies in the West, leaving Ottawa behind is not about revenge. It is about survival. Danielle Smith herself made it clear. Alberta has no issue helping smaller provinces with genuine needs. But there is no excuse for large, powerful economies like Ontario, Quebec, BC, and Alberta to be subsidizing one another. That was never the intent of equalization. Equalization was supposed to help those who truly could not keep up, not to punish the provinces that drive the economy. And yet Ottawa has twisted it into a weapon. They've turned Alberta into the piggy bank. And every protest, every objection has been ignored. That's why the domino effect is real. The moment Alberta breaks, Saskatchewan will follow. Manitoba will follow. Interior BC will join. And Ottawa will be powerless to stop it. Because the alternative, staying shackled to a system that bleeds you dry, is worse. This is the divide Canada is facing, and you cannot paper over it anymore. The West and Ottawa don't just disagree on policy, they don't even share the same values. Out here, life is built on faith, family, resource work, self-reliance. Out east, Ottawa drowns itself in bureaucracy, entitlements, green dictates written by progressives who have never set foot in an oil patch or a lumber yard. That is not a minor political argument. That is a cultural divide. And once politics hits the cultural level, there is no fixing it. You cannot negotiate over values. You cannot tell an entire region that their way of life is dirty, outdated, shameful, and then expect them to keep paying the bills. Once that realization hits, Confederation's glue dissolves. Take Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines law, aimed directly at Alberta's lifeblood. Take the emissions cap, dressed up as climate action, but designed to suffocate the industry that funds schools and hospitals in the West. Take the tanker ban off BC's north coast, blocking exports while Ottawa cheers on foreign oil imports. Tell me again how this is fair. It is not, it is punishment, and rural communities see it clearly. They don't think Ottawa misunderstands them. They think Ottawa despises them, and they are right. You cannot call this unity. You cannot call this confederation. This is exploitation wearing a polite mask. That's why the West has had enough. Danielle Smith has said it. Alberta has said it. Enough with Ottawa trampling provincial jurisdiction like the Constitution doesn't exist. Enough with meaningless climate policies that cripple the economy while doing nothing for the environment. Enough with the disrespect. The break is inevitable. Because you can argue about taxes and regulations, that's normal politics. But you cannot argue about identity. Once a province realizes its identity is under assault, there is no compromise left. Ottawa crossed that line long ago. So let's spell it out. If Alberta and Saskatchewan say they're done, then overnight 34% of Canada's oil production disappears. Equalization collapses, Ottawa's program, its ability to bankroll provinces in the east, evaporate. Ontario and Quebec can posture all they want, but they cannot replace billions in lost transfers. They simply can't. The math does not lie. Add Manitoba, with its rail and port access. And suddenly you have a functioning corridor that Ottawa cannot shut down. Add interior BC's forestry and mining, and the bloc becomes even stronger. A Western coalition that doesn't just survive, it thrives. And Ottawa, they will scream, sue, and threaten. But none of that changes the numbers. Confederation cannot survive when the people producing the wealth have decided they are finished being treated like colonies. And don't think Indigenous voices are missing from this movement. Many Indigenous communities want prosperity. They want energy projects. They want jobs. Ottawa has blocked those opportunities too, under the guise of protection, but you can hear it. Frustration from Indigenous leaders who say Ottawa is not protecting them, but trapping them. Once Alberta moves, those voices will only get louder. Ottawa cannot dismiss them forever. They cannot silence people who know what opportunity looks like and want their communities to share in it. This is where Canada stands today, staring at a West that is done begging for respect. Alberta is finished being Ottawa's piggy bank. Saskatchewan refuses to be left behind. Manitoba is stirring. Interior BC is rising. Once those dominoes fall, there is no putting Confederation back together. Ottawa made this breaking point inevitable with its arrogance, with its sabotage, with its contempt, and now the West is cashing in on the truth it has known all along. Canada does not work for them. So why should they keep paying the price? Let's be clear about what's at stake here. Alberta isn't just angry. It isn't just frustrated. It is mobilizing till the referendum isn't some distant fantasy anymore. It is locked and loaded. The Alberta Prosperity Project has the signatures. The threshold has been lowered, and the ballot question is ready. Ottawa can pretend that they hold all the cards, but the truth is Alberta has already set the clock ticking. This is no longer about if, this is about when, and Ottawa knows it. That is why you see the federal government scrambling to mock, to downplay, to smear anyone who even dares mention separation. They call them radicals, extremists, traitors. But let me tell you, this isn't extremism. This is realism. This is what happens when you bleed a province dry for decades and then spit in their face. The patience is gone. The goodwill is gone. And now the West is drawing a line in the sand because think about it. How much more can one province take? Alberta has already watched $500 billion in projects vetoed. They've hemorrhaged $250 billion in transfers over just a decade. They ate the $3 billion direct loss from Keystone XL alone. And still Ottawa expects them to sit down, shut up, and keep paying. No province on earth would tolerate that forever. Sooner or later, people break free, and Alberta has reached that point Now, let's not kid ourselves. Once Alberta makes the break, it is not going to be standing alone on an island. Saskatchewan is already signaling that it will not be the last one left holding the bag. Manitoba, the quiet middle child, is starting to stir. Interior BC, the resource towns outside of Vancouver's urban bubble, are already waking up. And once those dominoes start falling, Confederation as we know it is finished. You cannot glue the pieces back together. The crack is too deep. And here's the reality Ottawa refuses to face. This is not just about money. This is about values. The West and Ottawa don't even share the same worldview anymore. Out here, people still believe in work, in resource development, in building things with their own hands. Out East, it's bureaucracy, endless entitlement program, and lectures about climate change from people who have never stepped foot in a lumber yard or an oil field. That is not a minor policy disagreement. That is a cultural divide, and cultural divides do not heal with a quick policy tweak. They break countries. Look at the policies Ottawa has shoved down the throats of Western Canadians. Bill C-69, the No More Pipelines Law, a direct shot at Alberta's energy heart. The emissions cap, sold as climate action, but really nothing more than a slow suffocation of the one industry that pays for schools and hospitals across the prairies. The tanker ban on BC's north coast, blocking Western oil exports, even as Ottawa happily imports foreign oil. Tell me how that is fair. It's not. It is punishment. Pure and simple. And here's the thing. People in the West aren't stupid. They see it. They live it. Rural communities don't think Ottawa misunderstands them. They think Ottawa despises them. And when that realization sinks in, there's no way back. You can't tell an entire region that their way of life is dirty and shameful, then expect them to keep footing the bill for the rest of the country. That is not unity. That is exploitation. So let's talk consequences. If Alberta and Saskatchewan walk away, overnight, Canada loses 1/3 of its oil production. Equalization collapses. Billions in transfers vanish. Ottawa's ability to bankroll programs in Ontario, Quebec, and the Atlantic provinces evaporates. They can posture all they want, but the math does not lie. Ontario and Quebec cannot replace those billions. They simply can't. And once Manitoba leans west, the logistical backbone of the prairies, rail, ports, U.S. access shifts into the new block. Add in interior BC's forestry, mining, and energy, and suddenly you don't just have a rebellion, you have a functioning, thriving Western coalition. Ottawa can scream. They can sue. They can threaten. But none of that will change the numbers. Confederation cannot survive when the wealth-producing provinces decide they are finished being colonies. And that's exactly what's happening. Even Indigenous voices are starting to join the chorus. Many communities want prosperity, not endless handouts. They want pipelines, energy projects, jobs for their youth. Ottawa blocks those opportunities in the name of protection. But the truth is they're keeping Indigenous communities trapped in poverty. That frustration is boiling over. When Alberta moves, those voices will be louder than ever. Ottawa cannot dismiss them forever. This is where we are now. Alberta is tired of being Ottawa's piggy bank. Saskatchewan refuses to be left behind. Manitoba is quietly shifting. Interior BC is rising. The dominoes are lined up. Once they fall, you cannot put Confederation back together. The arrogance, the contempt, the sabotage, it all led us here. Ottawa made this breaking point inevitable, and that is why Wexit is no longer a punchline. It is a movement. It is survival. For decades, the West played the loyal partner, carried the load, paid the bills, and for decades, Ottawa punished them for it. Now the mask is off. Now the anger is turned into action, and Ottawa has no one to blame but itself. The message is simple. Alberta doesn't owe Ottawa anything anymore. Saskatchewan doesn't either. Manitoba doesn't. Interior BC doesn't. The West has realized what Ottawa always feared they would. Canada does not work for them. And if it doesn't work, why stay? Why keep paying the price for a system designed to exploit them? That is the question Ottawa cannot answer. That is the question shaking Confederation to its core. And that is the question that will decide Canada's future. The West is done begging for respect. Now, they're taking it.